everyone. Welcome to the Moga Bar Show. As always, my name is Gabe. With me, I have a special guest, Fru. Fru is a technologist, entrepreneur, author, and overall a good human being from Minneapolis by way of a small little village in West Africa. Fru, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you for having me on the show. Really excited to be here.
No, thank you. The pleasure's all mine. You've got an interesting story because you immigrated to the United States. I think it was 15 years ago. You told me, or 20 years ago. I don't recall.
About 15 years ago.
That's excellent. And of all the places, you moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Why there? We were just talking about this a little bit before the start. That's really cold there in the winters, but the summers are good. The lakes are starting to freeze over now. Why Minneapolis? You're coming from a town in Africa where I'm assuming it was not as cold as Minneapolis.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't as cold as Minneapolis. And just to give some context, so Cameroon in West Africa, there we have basically two weathers, right? There is the rainy season and the dry season. That's straightforward. In the rainy season, it rains. In the dry season, there's just sun and it's hot and dry, right? So living there and then coming here about 15 years ago was a change, as you can imagine, here in Minnesota, not from just having two seasons now to having four, right? The spring, the summer, the fall, and winter, and so having to deal with that was a change, but you kind of get used to it. Why Minnesota? It's always it's a fascinating question. I wish I had a more interesting answer than the answer I'm going to share with your audience here. My uncle, I had an uncle who came to the US before. And so I think he was in Canada and then immigrated to the US, came down to the US. And of course, if you know where Minnesota is on the map, it's really close, the border with Canada. So he came, lived in Minneapolis, he was here. So when I was thinking about coming to the US, there were many places I could have gone to. New York, I know you talked about being close to that area, Texas or California, but I wanted proximity to family. And so I just ended up in Minnesota. And it was kind of interesting because during my interview coming here, one of the questions that I was asked was, are you really sure you want to go to Minnesota during the interview? I was like, yeah, I think so. I think I can handle it. So that was just kind of a funny experience for me, but I'm loving it. It's a great place. Great folks. Minnesota's are known for being nice. When the summer comes, it's beautiful. The lakes, the outdoors, the trails. You can't get any better than that. I think that's why I've stuck here for as long as I have.
Excellent. Now let's talk about your career. You come, you moved to the US. What was the experience like for you? Number one, you are working in probably one of the most competitive fields. Where, technology, basically there's a technology startup nowadays. Every few days, there's a new company making, buzzwords and technology. You come and you've been in the tech field now for quite some time. You've become, a leader in the tech field. You've become a coach, a mentor to so many people. You have your own, website, your own, coaching and advising that you do on the side. What attracted you to technology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can talk about what attracted me to technology and what that journey has been like. And then I'm going to talk about my what I do today, which is really data and technology as a whole. I remember the young Fru back in Cameroon in Africa at the time, and we're talking about late 90s here, early 2000s, just being fascinated with technology. We didn't really have the kind of technology. There's technology here in the US, and then back then would catch up 5-10 years back, right? So the internet was just coming up at the time. And I remember my uncle, my dad would always leave the house and he would say, he's going to send a mail to my uncle, that's the uncle that was out here in the US. And so at home, we'd write up a letter, sit down, my dad would write the letter that he wants on a piece of paper. And then he would take that paper from where we lived, close to the village. And he'll go to town for the day. And then he comes back and says, oh, I've sent the letter to your uncle. And then I couldn't understand what he meant by he's taking this piece of paper. He went with it to town. He brought back the piece of paper and he tells us he sent that letter to my uncle. And then 2 or 3 days after, he will go back to town. He's going to bring back this printed piece of paper. That's the response. And he will show us well, this is the response your uncle sent us back. I will sit there, I will read the mail, and I was sitting, I couldn't figure out how this letter, he takes it and it goes that quick and then comes back to us with a response, right? Fast forward, me understanding about what an email was, the internet, and it was just this whole new field for me about technology. So technology to me is like magic. It just fascinates me. And I can remember vividly wondering, and I couldn't sleep about how you can take this letter and send it. And basically, what my dad did was he'll take it, go to town, and somebody would type it up, send an email to my uncle. And that's what they used to do there. People would, you pay and somebody can send an email for you, and then you come back and you pay, and then they'll check the response and give it to you because people just didn't have computers. So you had to go pay as a service for the one person who had computers in town to do it. So that just fascinated me. And I knew that I wanted to understand this technology thing, whatever it was. And so I over the summer, I took some classes that were available back there, learning about Microsoft DOS and command line. And even some of my classes, we literally didn't even have a computer to learn that. We would draw a computer on the board and name the parts, right? They'll say, oh, this is a mouse. This is a keyboard. This is a monitor, because there is no mouse to look at, right? And that was how I kind of really got at this, but I never gave up. And it just because of the curiosity and how it behaves like magic to me. I just said I wanted to understand that. So when I came to the US, it was natural that working in computers, working in technology was something I was going to do.
That's pretty impressive, actually, and that shows the determination, because a lot of people don't have that creativity. I think, being born and raised in the US, we've become spoiled to an extent because we've come to expect that. Although I didn't, like when I was, going to school in the 80s, we didn't have computers in schools, but we knew what computers were. There was one computer in the library that, the best behaving class and the best performing class got to go to the library like once a month to go see and use. So, but you guys had it where it's like you're drawing it out on the blackboard and you're like, that's the computer that you're using. So that's pretty impressive. And that's what sort of pulled you in. That's awesome. What was the transition like? Because, okay, you're coming, from Cameroon, you don't have the access to technology and you're, for the most part, self-taught. Now you're coming to the US where you may potentially have more opportunities, but sometimes depending on your experience, it is a little bit harder to get into because it's a weird thing. It's like, yes, we'll give you opportunities, but do you have the experience? But how do you get the experience if you haven't had an opportunity? So
about it, right? It's a famous catch-22. There you go. You need experience to have a job, but you need a job to have experience. And I think that is something that's not just limited to folks like myself or my story. I think almost everybody in the career, wherever, whatever career you are, faces that at some point in time. For me, when I came here, I did study computer science. Of course, I studied mathematics. So I really got into the field. And one of the things I believe is that, just be good, build competency. If you are good at what you do, it's very hard to ignore you. So, my mission was just to be the best, most knowledgeable person I am in my craft. And with that, it's led to me being able to have an internship, me being able to get my first job. Actually, the first job that I had was just basically being a tester. I was helping a bank here. It's a national bank, a very big bank. But very early on, I was, just basically doing software testing. And at home at night, I would always always tinkering. If there was something new happening out there, I want to understand. So even though my job had nothing to do with this, I was understanding how to script, how to work with Python and all of that. So at the job, it so happened that we had an engineer on the group, a developer. We had a tester. I was a tester. I was basically just testing the code, making sure the software was working. And we had a program manager and then the director and just that team that was working. One day I came in and the manager told us that the developer that we had, he was Indian, he was from India, wasn't coming anymore. And asked what was the issue. He said he had some issues with visa, and so he couldn't work. And now we didn't have a developer to work on this project we had been working on. And this guy was just kind of distraught, right? Kind of shocked. And how do we hire a person It takes, weeks and weeks to put out a job offer out there before you get somebody, train them, and the project was just at risk. So it so happened that I kind of figured out that, but we need to still get these files, right? We had some files we needed to get out. So I went back home that night, just wrote out this script, implemented what that guy was doing, came back, clicked the button. We had a bunch of files that we had sitting on the desktop. We wanted to get that into, at the time it was Access, right? And today you can't really use Access databases anymore. So I wrote that script, came back, clicked the button, and it ran. Right there on the spot, the guy was like, "Fru, you did this?" I'm like, yeah, this is something that I do on the side. It wasn't my job, but I've always done it. Not because, I felt that I want to get a job with it, but just because it was something that interests me to figure those kind of things out. Right there on the spot, he said, you want to be the developer and take his role? I was, scratching my head. It's like, well, I don't know, right? And this is where you get into that, I forget what it is, where you kind of doubt yourself, right?
Yeah.
You kind of feel like,
absolutely. You second guess yourself, and
yeah, there you go. So I almost felt like that, but I took the job, and then the rest was history, right? Did that, and then from there, it's, just keep progressing. And almost every trajectory in my career has been something like that, where the opportunity comes and you are right for the opportunity and you grab it. And I think that's how I've always progressed.
I love that, because it shows the courage to take on something that's sort of out, not necessarily out of your wheelhouse or out of your comfort zone, but something that you don't have experience in, you're not proven in, but you're willing to take the chance to prove yourself. And I kind of love that, because it's, it's resiliency. It's the ability to just sort of overcome what's in front of you, because while you've been doing it on the side, you didn't have that necessarily all that experience behind you for the people to believe in you, but they took a chance on you, and you made them proud of it. It was like, so that's pretty impressive. That's pretty good, man. That's kudos to you. So it's what led you to want to be, a mentor, coach, and advisor? Because you do a lot of speaking, you've written books, you're published on Amazon. What led you to want to share your experience and your knowledge with with the world, basically, and just go out there? Because a lot of people, you're still young. A lot of people want to.
I don't know how long that would last, but
I know it. It doesn't last long. We get a little bit older all the time, but a lot of people want to keep working, getting better. Patting their backs. Doing for themselves. But you want to give back. What brought this on? What made you want to say, you know what, I need to give back to others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll talk about that, and then we'll also talk about what I currently do today, because I think it's also fascinating with data and AI and all that stuff. But the giving back to me is just to me, it's a responsibility. I get in my circles, I get a lot of people who everybody has goals and ambitions, right? And I tend to see folks who are reaching out to me a lot in terms of how do I get into technology? How do I build a career in this? And some of the folks were folks that speak with a strong accent like I do, that have the stories similar to mine, and maybe didn't have the network and the connectivity in the industry to make that a reality. Because for me personally, I typically don't draw too much on that or hang on too much to that, but I didn't have a lot of mentors. Like trying to be a technologist, everybody at the time was thinking about, oh, you should, do maybe nursing or something else. But that just wasn't my predisposition. That wasn't something I was really good at. I just knew I prefer understanding code or understanding some technology. So that was kind of what I knew, that regardless of what anybody around me thinks, I was going to do what I wanted to do. But what that meant was I didn't have a lot of mentors. There weren't a lot of people, at least at the time, that had experience in the field. So I was kind of going at it by myself. But the way I solved that was attending conferences, meetups. There was almost every single meetup that there was in here in Minneapolis, I was a part of. You go there, you're going to see my face, right? So that led me to build my own tribe, to build my own community. And I spoke to folks. I had mentors, managers, bosses that were just tremendous mentors to me. And so what I'm doing now is giving back. There are people, again, in my shoes with my accent that, it's hard to explain how somebody learns about computer by looking at the blackboard. But if somebody has that experience, I can mentor them. I can say, hey, you can do it. It's okay, right? And be able to coach them. So that's what I try to do. And then what happened was I kept getting questions over and over. So the same questions, right, that I'll answer. Hey, Fru, can you help me with this? Or Fru, can you review my resume? Or Fru, what's your take on this? Right. And that's at the personal level. So what I ended up doing was I just took those nuggets, put them together into a book and say, okay, now if you're going to ask me that question, just make sure you read the book, which in one of the books here is, and I'm holding it on the screen if you are listening to this, your game plan for a lucrative career in data analytics, where I just prescribe what you need to do, resources you need to use, the steps you need to follow. It's kind of like a map, right? And so this has been helpful to lots and lots of people. Every single day I get reviews, I get emails, hey, Fru, thank you. That was very helpful. And to me, that's ultimately meaning for what I do. And I really just enjoy that.
That's great. Now let's kind of segue there because you held up the book, The Game Plan for Data Analytics. Let's talk about the data analytics and what you're currently doing, because you're doing a lot. So let's talk about that for a second. What are you currently into? I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about your employer. That's up to you. But like, what are you currently doing with data and AI, and how are you sort of not shifting your focus, but how are you basically implementing that into your strategy for helping people and, your everyday life, basically?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can talk about the industry as a whole, what I do. Today, I call myself a technologist, and that's the reason why, right? Technology is huge. There could be security, there could be hardware, there could be so many things that make up technologies. But I consider myself a technologist because I take all of those pieces and help companies solve the most pressing issue we have today, which is the issue of, or the opportunity we have today, which is the opportunity of data. So, if there was a saying that knowledge is power, right? And a lot of people will subscribe to that. Well, where does knowledge come from? Knowledge comes from information. Where does information come from? Information comes from data. So if you take that by corollary, more data equals to more power. And so we're having this gold rush of companies realizing the value of data, and they are positioning themselves to take advantage of that. And so what I basically do is help companies understand the value of data, regardless of the industry, and then also help them with the approaches to take advantage of that. So we can go across the board for industries. Think about retail. Today we're hearing about the supply chain issues and the strategies. Well, part of the solution for that lies in data. If you have more data around the containers, where they are in the different ports and the different logistics, you can solve for that at the end for consumption. So having more data can solve that problem. If you go to healthcare, we're seeing personalized medicine, we're seeing drug discovery happening because companies can get more data. So if you go to your doctor and you have unfortunately you have a type of cancer and somebody else has the same type of cancer, there still might be differences at the DNA level where one prescription or one drug might work for you or not the other person, right? So having all that types of data helps with more personalized medicine. And so we're seeing that being a really huge piece, right? Talking about education, we're hearing about even personalized curriculums, personalized education. Is there a reason why every kid in the classroom should be listening to the same lecture? Or can we target that lecture down to the specific concept, right? Maybe you understand algebra and I don't understand algebra and I understand more of differential equations. I should be getting more focus on explaining differential equations and, you getting your focus on algebra versus this, shotgun approach of just, throwing out lectures to students without necessarily understanding them. So taking advantage of data in there has a lot of opportunities. Go to politics. There is a massive, and this is something that, many people are getting to reckon with this. Back in 2006, I believe, or 8, that election, Barack Obama was known to have a team of data scientists that help him basically send out his message, target the right counties, the right folks, and he was able to win that campaign. Then we have like the Cambridge Analytica, which was kind of related to politics, but not so good, right? Because it didn't meet governance and privacy and all of that. So we're seeing this whole paradigm shift, this revolution that's happening, and every single company, every single vertical, every single individual is being affected by it. And so that's where I'm standing at this massive revolution and really trying to be the conduit that communicates this to organizations, and not just tell them that you gotta do something about data, but then helping them with the tools and the technologies and the mindset to go out and to take advantage of that. The company I work for, Snowflake, has an amazing platform for helping companies collect data, store data, analyze data. And that's basically what I spend my entire day doing, just telling that story and helping companies down that journey.
Okay, so I want to go back and touch on something that because data is very powerful. You talked about somebody potentially, if I have the same cancer as someone else, and potentially being able to review the information and the data and come up with a proper analysis or a treatment plan, potentially all these different things, and also with the politics, the Cambridge Analytica. But the one thing that is obviously very much in the news these days is the privacy concerns with so much access to data. How is that being addressed? How are companies and people as a whole, citizens, civilians, sure that they're being protected? There's this book by Jillian York called Silicon Values, that it basically touches on what's apparently a lack of ethics and morality in a lot of technology companies in Silicon Valley and wherever they're based at these days. How is that being, because you touched on the governance aspect of it, but how do people know? Because there's no way to really know. It's still sort of a leap of faith with data and analytics, where you're just trusting that the privacy is in place, the security is in place to protect that information. Because I imagine that that's sort of a hard selling point when you in your role, you're talking to, leaders, companies, potential users that are looking to invest or not invest, but, dive deeper into this world of data. They don't want to be caught up in the maelstrom of, hey, privacy. No, we're not violating anyone's privacy. So how do you address those concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good point, right? Because what we're seeing is there is this whole push for analytics, but then governance and privacy and security is a must, right? So now what we're seeing is this push for privacy first analytics. So you have to think about privacy first. It cannot be an afterthought. It has to be built into the solutions and the product that you build. And it's starting not just at the back end, which is the analytics, but also right at the front end. So from the phones we use that collects devices, right? The cars we're driving, the phone we use collects data. The car we're driving is collecting data. And so we're seeing this innovation happening around companies. And some of it will be legislation, and some of it will just be consensus around the industry for goodwill. Because if you don't do this, the whole industry could be in trouble, right? So there's going to be legislation like CCPA here in California. There's a GDPR out in the EU, and lots of these regulations are coming. Almost the different companies and blogs are creating all these regulations that companies are going to have to respond to. So that's on the regulation side. That's on the politics side. But on the company side, we're seeing things like differential privacy, which Apple pushed, where on the phones, where you're using your phone is collecting all that data, can it anonymize the data before it sends it to a company. So you still get to use it for analytical value, but the data is anonymized to the point that I can look at this data to say, all right, this is Fru or this is Magwell, right? So there is the technology side of it, but there's also the politics side and the cultural side to say, hey, let's make sure we're using data the right way. And then the folks that don't use it the right way, they get punished, right? Because if there's no consequences, there can't be accountability. Accountability comes with consequences. So all of this is going to have to come to play for us to really see the push in privacy. And just to add, privacy is such an interesting concept, because you might say that, okay, don't use Facebook if you want to stay private, or don't use so-and-so tool if
Mhm.
you don't want to share your information and want to stay private. But here's what's interesting, right? Your non-participation still generates data that could be used for against your will, if you so say so. All right. So take for
Interesting.
example, the 98% of individuals here in the United States can be identified uniquely by zip code, birthday, and gender alone. So if you can get zip code, gender, and birthday, you can pretty much identify somebody if you really want to, right? Because how many males are born on this date and at this gender that lives in a small city, let's say Plymouth? Not a lot. You can pretty much narrow down that field. So just using technology alone or saying that I'm not going to opt into this is not sufficient. Another example I love to give is assume that there is a game that's happening in town. Let's say a football game, the Minnesota Vikings are playing. I choose not to go to that game because, well, I don't want the cameras that are there or the surveillance there to pick up my face. I want to stay private. But guess what? My non-participation, if somebody is looking and analyzing that data and says, hey, who are the people that did not come to this game, right? Now they can run some analysis to discover that, well, I'm a person that doesn't like to go to games. And so if I don't like to go to games, maybe I stay home and I watch TV. And if I stay home and watch TV, so maybe more ads should go to me, right? So even if I choose not to participate in that, I'm still getting
Targeted.
getting impacted by this. And so it's such it's a wicked problem. But that's why technology is going to help, but legislation too is also going to be required to make sure that there is accountability for companies who even decide to say, hey, we're just going to use corner means to still get at you, to make sure that if I really don't want to get something, don't send it to me or don't make me participate in it.
That's interesting. Excuse me. I never looked at it that way, because it was I'm like, if I don't want to use Facebook, I'm not going to use Facebook. But my not using it is also okay. I never looked at it that way, so that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's something that folks don't think about, but there are PhD students out there and really smart people whose job is to make you be a part of the system, right? So and so legislation somehow should hopefully help, and maybe goodwill and culture would also help. So
I want to, because since we're talking about being a part of the system, goodwill, legislation, random question, not really related to this, but was Edward Snowden foolish for revealing stuff that for the most part people already knew, and basically he's stuck in Russia now? Was he just a fool for doing that?
One of the things I've learned in my days is not to talk about what I have no idea about. And politics is one of those things that I really don't know. So
no, that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. That goes back to just the long conversation that I've had with friends over this same debate, privacy. And it's like, we all know what's happening. We use Google all the time. I use Google Maps. We're on a Zoom call. It's like everything, everything that people says you don't do. I'm like, we do it in some capacity, where they're using Google Maps to drive. So yes, they're getting that information somehow. And so, okay.
Yeah. And I can also talk about something that is because we talk about this innovation that's all happening. It's happening at different levels, and I just always like to call that out, where there is innovation happening at the software level, where we're seeing new applications that are coming out to help with not just AI but privacy as well. So a new machine learning model. So we're talking about like XGBoost is a very popular algorithm. There is deep neural networks, which is pushing a lot of advances as well. And so that's also requiring understanding of being able to explain AI. So for example, if I interact with a company and they use a machine learning model behind the scenes to either give me credit or to not give me credit, can they explain why that decision was made, right? You can't just say, well, we made this decision because the algorithm told us to make this decision. Right now, you got to explain, why did the algorithm, what choices, what decision points, what data informed this algorithm to choose to give me credit or not, right? Because now you can start seeing us talking about biases, talking about the choices that the algorithm gets to make, because algorithm is based on data. What data represent comes from reality. Well, if you don't have the right data, you're gonna build the wrong models, and those wrong models is gonna affect people in the real world. And so there is a push for privacy, not just on the data side of things, what we collect and how we store that, but also in the models that we build. You hear this push of explainable AI. You gotta explain what your AI is doing and have the lineage about it, and make sure your data set is complete and as diverse as the problem as you're trying to solve. Because garbage in from a data perspective, garbage out with the model, and it's going to affect real people.
Okay. So with data, AI and everything, how is this going to impact the future of what's to come in terms of usability? Are we seeing a situation where people are now going to start pulling back in terms of technology? Because I feel like Pandora's gate has already been opened in terms of what we do. Everyone has a smartphone. I don't know the age, you've got a 4-week-old. I don't know if you're going to wait until she's, 3 months old or he's 3 months old before you give a phone. But it's like, do the parents have an obligation, just cut off and be like, well, no, we're going to wait. You're not going to get an iPad until you're a teenager, or whatever the situation is, because we all have smartphones, we all have data. Now, Mark Zuckerberg's coming out with the metaverse. I don't know what that is. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't understand the thing about that. But how does data, because we have more data, Facebook has just recently been in the news because of the whistleblower, Frances Haugen, and, showing that they had the data, but they didn't act on it. That, Instagram and Facebook was having negative impacts on children's lives and people's lives in general, but specifically children. But they didn't act on the data. So data just sitting there, not being analyzed or not being acted on, is essentially useless data in a way, because you're not doing anything with that data, or you're choosing to not do anything. Does the government really need to get involved and say, okay, enough is enough, stop, this is it, done? What's the breaking point for data, for tech as a whole?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I wish I had a holy grail answer, which I think I don't, but I do have a perspective on this. So, and that perspective comes from the understanding of what's happening. Almost, and there's a saying in the industry that 90% of the world's data in existence today was created in the last 2 years, right? So that means that if you just look at the wave, that it's gonna be to bet against that it's gonna be on the losing side. By betting against, meaning to say, hey, I'm just gonna not be a part of this, or I'm just gonna run away and try not to give any data and just stay in the cave somewhere. For the most part, it's probably not gonna happen, right? So we're still gonna have to live in this world where, and to me, actually, there are aspects of it that I enjoy, right? More data, more sensors. You can have IoT devices in the house monitoring the temperature. I recently installed it's not anything complex, but just a sensor device on my garage that I can monitor from my phone, and open my garage up and open my garage from wherever I am in the world, and I can check if it's open or closed. That's data, that's information. And now if I'm somewhere, I'm not worried if the garage door is open or not. So there is a lot of opportunities for data. And sometimes we maybe might miss that opportunity if we get cynical and stifle innovation by drumming too much alarms about the potential for data. So it's going to be a balancing act where we want the innovation to happen. We want the companies to innovate, and to innovate, it takes data. You're not going to, like the company that has the IoT device that opens up my garage, they need that data to tell me if my garage is open or not. So there's no way to really get around that. But now, how do they secure it? How do they use it so it's ethical? So it's a balancing act. That's why I said I don't have a silver bullet yet. But I'm on the side that I'm not going to bet against data. I'm not going to try to live in a cave. But there's going to be a very important aspect of data literacy, right? We used to have just basic literacy where you can read and write. And if you had to go to school and you were considered literate, you had to be able to read your ABC, and you had to be able to take a book like this and be able to read the pages. And that was basic literacy. And so now we're coming into that point where we need not just technical literacy, but specific data literacy, where people understand what is data, how is data being collected. Just simple things like your participation or non-participation still gives information, and educating people about that. So, they can make informed decisions and they can, live accordingly. So like for my son, I'm definitely gonna, as a parent, my goal is to limit that until he has the control to then want to make his own decision, but then to give him the literacy to understand that, if you're using this Google Maps and you're doing all of this stuff, is being collected. And if that's what you want, go for it. If that's not what you want, make sure that you don't post that picture on Instagram if you don't have to be posting it. There are people who post the pictures because of maybe it's a business or they get something out of it. But if you do it from an informed perspective, it's okay. What the challenge is if people do it not knowing, or if Facebook is collecting my data with me not knowing, if Cambridge Analytica is sending me something without me knowing. But if I know and I consent to it, I think a lot of people can stomach that. It gets really challenging if they don't know and they don't consent to it, and it's a problem. So that literacy is going to be very, very key. Just to pass it back to you here, but one of the biggest things too is on the data side is just understanding basic statistics. I remember growing up, my dad who used to say, numbers don't lie. Like if you look at something and it says 4, then it's 4. Like math is the most pure subject there is. But what I've realized that beyond just your basic algebra, which we all can agree, the biggest source of lie is numbers, is statistics. And companies are using this with impunity, right? Where you can be watching a TV show or you can be looking at the news and somebody will give you statistics of, 5% of so-and-so are doing this, or teenagers are buying this device. Well, is it really 5% of all teenagers or 5% of the 3 teenagers that you looked at are doing this? So they can use numbers, like I said, with impunity to lie, to convince, to deceive, for propaganda. And having data literacy, which also includes basic statistics, arithmetic, and number literacy, is going to be very key as we go into this next generation. I don't think it's going to be about stopping companies for having data, but it's going to be about having a more informed group of citizens that knows what's going on, and they can make their own choices. As
Basically, yeah. So it comes down to what we're always told: inform yourself so that you can make the best decision possible. Do your research, and if you don't know, ask someone who knows a lot more than you do, like you do. So yeah. It's like, I'm always I'm gonna reach out to you all the time if I have a question. You know that, right? So, Fru, I want to thank you for your time. Before I let you go, though, where can people? I'm going to put everything in the show notes, but where can people reach out to you if they just want to talk to you, have questions, want to be mentored by you? Where can people reach you?
Hey, thanks for that opportunity. Really appreciate that. I love to be very active on LinkedIn, so LinkedIn will be a natural place to reach out to me. I have a Twitter as well. Tech with Fru is my blog that I use, that I create content on, talking about AI, big data, machine learning, ethics, governance, and all the 9 yards. So everything about data and what it means for companies that I get to talk to every single day, for the different leaders that are going to make decisions about how we collect, we store, we manage data. I talk about all of that on the blog. I talk about the AI revolution coming up with like GPT-3, which is a generalized pre-trained model coming from OpenAI. So lots of promise there. I talk about neural networks. I talk about XGBoost. So everything in between, you can find that on my blog, and also a YouTube channel that I have. Not as popular as this one, but you can check it out. It's also called Tech with Fru. Basically, anything I know, if I can share it, I make a video and I share it there. And then last but not least, also the book is out. game plan for success in analytics. I believe in having maps. I believe in having game plans. I believe that you gotta know what you're trying to do, and so this book was basically just giving that game plan. So if you or anybody's looking for a game plan, this could be an option to consider tools on Amazon right now. So lots of places you can find me around on the web.
Excellent. Fruit, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to take any more of your time. I know how busy you are, but I appreciate you so much for joining me, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gabe. All the best to you.